Chapter 1. What is one of the most overlooked symptoms of narcissism? Narcissism is manifested in communication patterns that include habitual non-listening. Narcissists tend to do lots of talking and really little listening. The narcissist knows best, after all, so why even bother listening to what other people have to say? Ever spoken with someone who reacted dismissively to every little thing you said? Narcissists brush aside or deprecate what others say, rather than really listening. One tip-off is the word but. But deletes whatever came previously, but a much better way to look at it is. Another tip-off is intonation. If the response sounds inflamed or deprecating, that's the sound of a hesitation to listen for what's valid in what you just said. Why do not therapists use poor listening to assess narcissism? Most psychologists work with individual patients instead of with couples. Narcissistic individuals do tend to listen to somebody they see as higher in power than themselves. If those with narcissistic habits respect their therapists, their listening can seem to their therapist to be quite normal. If the therapist, in contrast, were to see that same client connecting with her or his spouse or workers, the listening patterns would most likely be glaringly different: dismissive, ignoring altogether, decreasing the value of the point that the spouse or worker just made, disagreeing with it, or pointing out what was wrong with it. There's an additional reason why therapists seldom keep in mind the narcissistic pattern of dismissive listening: the DSM. The DSM-5, also called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, notes the factors that therapists' usage for diagnosing psychological issues and troublesome character patterns. Sadly, this manual makes no mention of listening deficiencies as a diagnostic element for narcissism. Again, psychology in a general sense, and a lot more so, the psychiatrists who write the DSM manual, have traditionally focused primarily on individuals rather than on what those people do when they are connecting with others. Therapists tend to see what we have been taught to look for. Our diagnostic manual omits teaching us to look at communication patterns like poor listening practices. How can you deal with narcissistic dismissive listening in your life? If somebody you know talks with minimal listening, most importantly, do not take it personally. Dismissing what you say as wrong or unimportant says more about that individual than it does about you or what you have said. Just as you would not take personally the restricted hearing ability of somebody with partial deafness, realize that your narcissistic good friend, colleague, or loved one has a genuine handicap. Second, just like you would repeat, maybe more loudly, what you were attempting to say to a deaf person, find ways to repeat better the message that you were attempting to communicate. A really good formula for doing this is to agree extremely cooperatively with what the narcissist has said, then add back your previous point. You. The walls in this room are an uncommon color of green. The narcissist. No, they're not. They're yellow. You. Yes, they are yellow-colored, and with a lot of green in the yellow, rather like a lime color. Narcissists can appear attractive at first. Many narcissistic people are good-looking, earn a good living, and are fun to be around. Some women are attracted to male narcissists because they appear so effective, unique, and confident. Some men are attracted to female narcissists who are noticeably gorgeous or sexually appealing. It's only when narcissists begin to disregard their partner's concerns and dismiss what their partner says that the narcissistic listening disorder becomes a source of distress. Remember, narcissists do listen to people who appear to more effective or who have something that they really want. So when they are courting, they listen very well. If you have chosen a narcissist as a life partner, or you have to deal at work in an ongoing way with someone who has difficulty listening to you, begin by understanding that narcissists are handicapped people. Despite their charisma, they have an authentic listening deficit. Aim beside ratchet up your confidence. You will need to be able to speak in a way that conveys an inner sense of personal power. Third, from that confidence position, at least on matters of import to you, use strong collaborative dialogue skills. Show that you have heard your partner's perspective, and after that, persist till you have succeeding in conveying your perspective as well. Remind yourself that most narcissists can and do listen, even with empathy, when they experience the individual with whom they're talking as having greater power. Putting it in practice. Here's an example from my scientific practice. Gina finally had had enough of the inability of her partner Jonathan to listen to her side of problems. When they first met, Jonathan appeared to be a great listener. They delighted in long talks together. Gradually, however, Jonathan had become oppositional. Eventually, he started raging to block out Gina's voice when he had offered his perspective, and she tried to add another. Talking about political concerns was the worst. Attempting to discuss any upset that had taken place between them similarly caused a flood of buts from Jonathan, followed by anger if Gina tried to verbalize her views. Gina felt great relief once she made a decision to no longer communicate with Jonathan when he went into his withdrawn, unsympathetic, and significantly upset mode. She chose a peaceful time to clarify to Jonathan her choice. Any time from this point forward that she was tactfully expressing her viewpoint, if Jonathan blocked her from voicing her concerns by getting dismissive or mad, she would silently stand up and leave of the room. Then she did it, several times. Who would have thought? After some walkaways, Gina was shocked to see Jonathan return to courting mode. Gina now had the upper hand. Jonathan didn't want his spouse to abandon him when they were talking about issues of import to him. With his partner now the pack leader, Jonathan settled down. He listened to Gina as he had when they had initially been courting. He did far less negating of whatever she said. He ended his former insistence that he always was right and she was wrong. Now, Jonathan showed his partner only his charming best self. He even had started, as when they initially met, asking questions to generate her perspectives. The word "but" appeared to be passing away out of his vocabulary. It was being replaced by "yes" and "what do you think about?" The outcome? Gina and Jonathan have become buddies again. Gina can unwind in the house and enjoy Jonathan's lovely sides. If Jonathan slips back into narcissistic discussion mode, Gina exits the room. Mainly, though, Gina is happier, and Jonathan seems happier too. The moral of the story? In engaging with a mild to moderately severe narcissist, you need to stay strong. Not aggressive, just strong in self-confidence. Secure yourself. Update your abilities for cooperative dialogue to build your self-esteem. Then expect to be heard. You never ever know what might emerge. The most ignored sign of narcissism could, or may not, go away. Chapter 2. Celeb Narcissism May Be Infectious. In current weeks, Kanye West has shared that he is God's vessel, too busy writing history to read it, and is the voice of his generation. He adds that the greatest pain in his life isn't to be able to see himself perform live. Just like his new wife, the most stunning woman in human existence, Kanye clearly comprehends something. In pursuit of center stage, narcissism sells. But the self-obsession we accept and motivate for those who find their way to the spotlight is a bit tougher to handle off it when it finds its way into our lives. Pick a public-facing occupation and the narcissists are likely to flock to its upper tiers. Kurt Cobain said, "I don't care what you think unless it has to do with me." Madonna said she neutralized radiation at a Ukrainian lake. Lindsay Lohan offered, "Prettiness, grace, and confidence. I've learned to accept and really appreciate what nature gave me." Do a flyover of the consecutive train wrecks from Clinton to Spitzer to Petraeus to Wiener, and their brothers bonded in the belief that the rules are hassles suffered by those that wash their own vehicles. Terrific stuff, but the great future of star narcissism is that we hold the clicker. When we have had enough, we can simply proceed to another diversion. In our lives, the closer the narcissist is, the hard it is to get away the vortex. According to Dr. Drew Pinsky, star narcissism is communicable. In his 2009 book, The Mirror Effect: How Celeb Narcissism is Seducing America, he and co-author Dr. Mark Young reason that the excesses of stars, punctuated by the public implosions, are not only captivating. Nurtured by social media and real estate TV, they're infectious. Vanity, exhibitionism, and entitlement, and the other trademarks of narcissism are infecting the population at large. If celeb narcissism is the social pathogen they specify, then it has a big and willing host. Few of us have made it through life untouched by the narcissists that walk among us: moms, fathers, good friends, co-workers, even ourselves. If you wonder, you can find different versions of the Narcissistic Personality Inventory online. Before you take it, observe the prominent warns that the results are not good or bad, an indication of personal worth, or an important reason to a run to a therapist. So, a narcissist is part of our lives. So what? What's wrong with self-confidence? In fact, it would appear that a little narcissism is a helpful quality in anybody who thinks they're qualified to lead. There is an easy difference between high self-confidence and narcissism. Those with high self-esteem use their self-confidence as a tool to forge relationships. True narcissists could care less. They don't want relationships. They really want an entourage. Psychologists well answer rapidly that true narcissists warp the orbits of all around them. Cornered by a narcissist at a celebration, you can wait on them to breathe, create a diversion, and make a run for it. When the narcissist is in the family or at work, they're more troublesome. Narcissistic parents or caretakers are placed to do the absolute worst mental damage. Children toss themselves against the rocks, trying to please a caretaker who can take no enjoyment in the accomplishments of others, even their offspring. A good friend, a baseball player in high school, had a mom who is the meaning of an egotistical parent. In any situation, he said, if it wasn't about her, she would find a way to make it about her. When I would pitch, and remember, we're not talking about a future pro profession here, she would say she was too anxious to watch. So she would go out to the car, and my brother would need to come out every inning to tell her the score. Whether I pitched well didn't matter. Whether we won or lost didn't matter. Putting a barrier between her and the rest of our family didn't matter. What mattered, all that mattered, was that attention moved from the field to our vehicle. From a young age, that sort of narcissistic indifference plants questions. Why am I not really good enough? Why am I not lovable? What does it take? The sorry irony here is that those questions can be the foundation of a next-generation narcissist. Narcissists can also be particularly disruptive to the work environment. The dynamics are comparable to the family. They will be the center of office attention, despite the damage done to arrive. Workplace narcissists can be engaging, confident, and creative. They can even be inspiring in the sense that employees strive to attain the recognition that doesn't come. They can just as easily be as managing from hell, simple to anger, distrustful, separated, controlling, unwilling to listen to ideas that aren't their own. They can be psychological vampires, feeding upon the turmoil they create. Celebrity narcissism is under our control. It is entertainment we can consume or pass by. In our lives, it takes consciousness and change. First, we need to comprehend when narcissism makes that departure from the strong self-image that can rally others to a self-obsession that relegates others to the cheering section. Understand that, for a narcissist, you belong to a plan, and your worth depends upon their ability to make you play a supporting role. As a family member, develop perspective. Don't make your self-regard contingent on their approval. Your failure to make them happy is not about you. Attempting tougher most likely will not help, but they will get a bang out of watching your attempts. At work, if you have to play the game, play it well. In any demand, make certain you are clear that neither the benefit or the potential attention is about you. Hard to swallow, maybe, but effective. Narcissists are infamously prone to reinforcement of their own self-image. Can a narcissist change? It's possible. But once an individual is convinced they're the center of the universe, it leaves little room for perspective. Chapter 3. The 3 questions to examine a narcissist's harmful capacity. Most of us would probably concur that we live in an annoyingly narcissistic society. We complain about other people who are connected to their cellular phones, and the cam it consists of, that they lose all local color and time as they stand in our way as we try to navigate down the pathway, or circumnavigate areas of scenic beauty, natural disaster, or man-made trauma. Grown-ups and youth are losing their lives in an effort to get the flawless selfie, and this shows a cultural shift that is going to be challenging to shift back. Nearly everyone has some level of narcissism, and there are absolutely healthy levels of this trait. Feeling great in yourself, having a healthy level of self-confidence, and believing in yourself are all positive characteristics to have. Nevertheless, there comes a point when the line between healthy self-confidence is crossed and narcissism is displayed. Risk signs of unhealthy narcissism. Typically, the following characteristics were used to define scientific levels of narcissism. Inflated and unjustified self-regard with expectations that others will concur. An inordinate concentrate on having success, power, and impractical relationships. Belief that one transcends and can only be understood by individuals or institutions with the exact same exceptional standing. Continuous need for attention and severe praise. Belief that one really deserves unique treatment above and beyond others, and that others should unquestioningly carry out any demand. Exploitative view of relationships. Failure to acknowledge or comprehend the emotions or needs of others. Belief that others are jealous of one or being jealous of others. Exhibiting conceit in interpersonal interactions. Some of the qualities on this list are not too concerning, it would appear, in themselves. Truth be told, some of these traits would suggest a strong and proficient leader in regulated dosages. Conceit, boldness, and supremacy have been revealed to be qualities that can help leaders make it to the top. Though, when these qualities are integrated with a sharp focus on self-aggrandizement and the failure to view others as human beings in their own right, narcissists become harmful. Their self-inflated egos could also empower them to hurt others through the outright neglect of other people's feelings or deliberate injury to others, whether physical, psychological, or psychological. The DSM-5 suggests that narcissism has become a considerable problem when a person's narcissistic propensities lead to impairments in functioning in identity, self-direction, empathy, and relationships. Sadly, narcissistic tendencies usually halt budding relationships in their tracks. Furthermore, when a person's identity is built on false and grand ideas of superiority, effective performance in a professional setting isn't possible in the long term. These 4 parts are truly those areas that are essential to being genuine, and, well, human. Unfortunately, people who suffer from personality conditions of any magnitude are blind to the belief that they have any sort of problem. People who struggle with histrionic tendencies can't imagine that they are making a mountain out of a molehill. You cannot convince an individual who experiences fear that they are wrong in their belief that a person is out to get them. Narcissists don't believe that their self-adoration and absence of empathy for others presents a problem. 3 questions to evaluate damaging narcissism. If you are in a relationship with a person who appears a little way too much in love with the mirror, or too invested in getting just the right photo of her or himself, or too sure she or he is the best thing to ever show up in the corporate world, you might want to consider the following additional qualities before making a last get in touch with her or his level of narcissism. Does she or he deliberately antagonize others and show active hostility? Does she or he show signs of grandiosity that keep her from relating to other people? Does she or he invest a lot of time in attention-seeking behaviors that are designed to draw attention to any place she or he is? Many specialists believe that these characteristics, in addition to the impaired functioning in multiple areas, are better ways to assess narcissism. Narcissists can be engaging and entertaining, but when the shine wears off and you're feeling used, it could be time to leave with dignity, as narcissists rarely recognize that they could be the reason that their relationships do not last. Chapter 4: The Rise and Demise of Financial Narcissism. Regardless of political perspective, everybody has been really sickened by this election process. It has brought to light a dark underbelly of contemporary American culture, swarming with dissatisfaction, bitterness, absence of trust, high anxiety, and fear. Importantly, the process has made each of us question the essential components that produce a great leader. Should the focus be on policy, or character, or having the benefits of being inside or outside the system? It has put a spotlight on the role of cash. How much of a role should cash play in management? Is it a good friend or foe? Something to appreciate or dislike? Should I rely on a person who has it, or feel more aligned with somebody who doesn't? Money is, and has always been, a powerful impact on leadership and governance. But what happens when its role is overvalued? With financial narcissism, rather than money being a fraction of the whole, it ends up being a main organizing principle in which financial assets become the specifying component for self-confidence, social status, and community value. From this state of mind, the best leader is the one with the biggest savings account, or the capability to move huge savings account as she or he so pleases. The GPS for arriving isn't clear, but it is eventually about me, what I have, and who I can impact. All or absolutely nothing thinking and feeling prevails. My assessment or devaluation of you is eventually based upon whether you will help me get more cash or cash-associated impact. At Cash, Meaning and Choices Institute, we have been blessed to work with, and learn a lot from, some of America's entrepreneurial success stories. Women and men who have built effective profit and non-profit enterprises with grit, courage, vision, respect, and stability. While no two stories are alike, we have been impressed by their ability to integrate personal strength, durability, and smarts with respect, communication, and collaboration with their associates and colleagues, not only their inner circle, but all who have contributed to the success of their business. You might have become aware of these leaders. Their stories do appear occasionally in the media, or in less recognized periodicals, such as Corporate Responsibility publication. Tons of them embody what we have found out about abundance intelligence, the exceptional capability to lead with clearness, humbleness, respect, and versatility. They are great students. While they are extremely strong individuals, they are willing to learn much from others who have different ideas, to learn a lot from their mistakes, to take responsibility for issues, fix up, and proceed. And they use what they have learned to be resistant and move forward in new ways. As people who have created great wealth, they know it is only a fraction of the entirety of what makes for a successful business and successful life. They value mutuality and connection in their relationships. They are self-assured but not self-arrogant, and they are sensitive to the impact of their wealth on those that aren't as fortunate as they have been, working to optimize opportunities and minimize the damaging elements of their wealth. 5 years ago, I wrote something about an increasing epidemic of monetary anxiety and uncertainty in our nation. I defined it as a cash psychology sea change in our society, a shift from opportunity, a we-can-do-it mindset, and a sense of possibility, to psychological and financial pessimism and contraction. That constricting of socio-economic focus results in a parallel restriction of our frame of mind. In an individual's thinking, creativity and optimism about now and the future. The growth and relative stability of the wealth gap only added to lots of people's sense of powerlessness and disappointment. Adding salt to the injury are all of the stories of unexpected wealth, the young tech millionaires who appear to manage the world by age 30. They are the role models for monetary narcissism. They have it. How can I get it? Why don't I have it? Who is getting in my way? Ironically, teamwork, cooperation, and connection are the secrets for success in many parts of the tech world. As one of our clients said, who went from the backyards of the Rust Belt to great financial success, it was his capability to build great teams in which 1 + 1 = 4. Narcissism in any form is a psychological defense against its opposite, feeling useless and insufficient. Financial narcissism is the psychopathology of aggrandizing wealth as a way to offer defense against an inner self that is upset, empty, and not sure of your true worth. Cash is a great short-term drug. We can use it, like heroin, to provide for short-term anxiety reduction and satisfaction. And if we make it our god, it will drive us into a roller coaster of narcissism, never ever ending cycles of manic greatness and depressive powerlessness. There is a wide variety of books on leadership that try to unload and conceptualize its core components. Most appear to agree that a leader who is both effective with jobs and people has a mix of key qualities, such as guts, insight, resilience, humility, stability, and proficiency. Remember, it isn't one, but all of these elements interacting. Humility in this regard is not simple self-effacement. It is having the inner liberty and self-control to know what you do not know. It is key to learning, flexibility, and building bridges of partnership. So let us try to find all of these factors in those who want to lead us, moving forward. We really need leaders who model a balance of power and humbleness and do not promote the psychopathology of financial narcissism. And empower yourself. Give yourself the gift of increasing your abundance intelligence. Have your values drive your money, not your cash drive your values. Knowing that money is a tool to live your values, to help provide for your sustenance, care, and fulfillments. That is the single most crucial lesson we have learned from our effective clients. No matter the size of your wallet, know that your self-worth isn't equal to your monetary worth. Chapter 5. Can narcissism ever be useful? To really love oneself is the start of a lifelong romantic passion, wrote Oscar Wilde. Understood for his wit and irony, was Wilde describing narcissistic love or real self-love and healthy narcissism? There's a big difference. Wilde's usage of the word romance suggests the former. That's crucial to differentiate the two ideas. In contrast to authentic love, romantic love is filtered by illusion and idealization. In the romantic phase of relationships, extreme emotions are mainly based upon forecast and physical pleasure. All is rosy because we do not actually know the other person or see her or his defects. In Wilde's novella about narcissism, Dorian Gray, Dorian, a narcissist, falls in love with his appearance in a portrait of himself, just as mythological Narcissus loved his own reflection in a pool of water. Both he and Dorian were incapable of interest in, or love for, anyone else. They ignored their arrogance, sense of entitlement, or cruelty to the women who loved. Self-love and narcissism compared. Real self-love incorporates loving our frailty and flaws. It's beyond self-esteem, which is a self-evaluation. We totally accept ourselves. Unlike Dorian, who could not bear the thought of aging while his portrait stayed young, when we love ourselves, we're linked to our ageless self. Self-love makes us humble. We have no need to parade behind a facade of false pride, nor do we idealize and aggrandize ourselves or deny or hide our weak points and flaws. Instead, we embrace our full humanity. Narcissism, the personality disorder. Narcissistic arrogance conceals self-loathing. Narcissists cannot endure being wrong or slammed. This is the reason that they are defensive and hypersensitive. Still, when they get adoration and attention, they're happy, showing their immaturity. Like bullies, their inner embarrassment makes them relentlessly critical of others. They can dish but not take it. Their bragging and grandiosity reveal insecurity. To compensate, they decorate only want to associate with high-status people and institutions, and haven disdain for those seen as inferior. In a narcissist's world, things are black and white. They actually believe they are always prospering or failing, and their state of mind fluctuates accordingly. They make no room for mistakes or mediocrity, which can put them into a rage. On the other hand, self-compassion enables us to accept ourselves and our imperfections, and feel sorry for others. Healthy narcissism. Early in my healing, I dreamt that I needed to be more narcissistic. The problem was the viewpoint of myself was not high enough. Freud recognized a natural, narcissistic stage of child development when toddlers feel they own the world. They can suddenly walk and want to explore everything. Individuals with narcissistic personality disorder get arrested in early development and don't mature past it. There are theories about the cause of narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, which has the negative aspects of narcissism, like entitlement, exploitativeness, and absence of empathy. Freud noted that a particular amount of self-focus and self-regard is vital to developing a healthy ego structure. Healthy narcissism allows us to have the confidence and self-investment to succeed. Due to their reported high self-esteem, research shows that narcissists maintain a sense of well-being with low levels of depression, anxiety, and solitude. People with insufficient egocentricity are at greater risk for psychological disorders. They are attracted to narcissists who have qualities such as boldness, self-confidence, and power, which they themselves lack. In contrast, they do not have faith in or invest in themselves and instead help others. Some children get their natural pride squelched by a dominating, critical parent. They carry poisonous shame. Think of false pride and embarrassment as opposite ends of a spectrum. Neither is a pretty good place to live from. It can be said that for narcissists, embarrassment is unconscious. They act in ways in which are shameless. For codependents and individuals with low self-esteem, healthy pride is unconscious. Most people may admire and compliment them, but they do not feel deserving and trust them. A goal of healing is to fall closer to the middle, where we can feel pride without arrogance. Our greater self-esteem boosts our life, creative skill, strength, and mood. We gain healthy self-assurance and aspiration that fuel our self-efficacy and ability to achieve our goals. With high self-confidence, we expect to succeed and likely will and can also endure frustration and failures. We are not protective and can get feedback. We request and chase after what we really want. Our self-regard empowers us to challenge abuse or disrespect. Feeling deserving, we do not think twice to say no and set limits. Yet, we have empathy and consideration for others. Despite the fact that we seek to get our wants and needs met, we do not manipulate, control, seek vengeance, envy, or make use of people. Recovery. Healing is a journey of self-love. Yet, people who go after self-growth are sometimes identified narcissistic because they focus on themselves as part of their recovery. Normally, they should learn how to think more highly of themselves, grow their self-esteem, and set boundaries that show self-care. Others may consider them self-centered and overly self-involved. Still, this is far different from narcissism. Narcissists do the opposite. They do not look at themselves, take some responsibility, or feel a need to enhance. And doing this, or looking for help, would be an admission of imperfection, that they're flawed. Instead, they blame others. Chapter 6. A quick fix for narcissism and potentially depression. The key to grow and gratifying relationships is to utilize what I call bilateral listening, that is, two-sided listening. The capability to hear your own perspective coupled with the ability to listen and be responsive to others' signals, highest-level relationship functioning. The good news, bilateral listening is a skill, a practice that you can decide to learn. The bad news is, whenever that you slip too far on one or the other side of the listening continuum, you are at risk for falling under either narcissism, it's really all about me, or depression, it's really all about you. What is narcissism? The core of narcissistic functioning is paying attention just to your own desires, issues, fears, viewpoints, and preferences. If these thoughts drown out the voices of others with whom you are talking, you are heading down narcissism roadway. Similarly, if you are susceptible to view your perspective and ideas as right and others as wrong, narcissism, here we come. Most people who do narcissistic one-sided listening can hear others' perspectives when they're feeling relaxed. They also tend to listen better when the person they are communicating with has more power than they feel that they do. It's primarily when there are disagreements that they tighten up and close their ears, or when they regard themselves as more effective than the person they're talking with. Self-centered people who listen primarily just to their own voice tend to forget that the other person is even there. Paying insufficient attention to somebody's partner invites ultimate falling out of love. Narcissistic listening leads also to confusion. Why does my partner, from whom I expect to get love, and even adoration, so often become withdrawn, irritated, and depressed? For the ones that too quickly quit on expecting their thoughts to be taken seriously, narcissistic depressive interactions stimulate negative feelings. Irritation, bitterness, disappointment, anger, and, in reaction to essential problems, depression develop when an individual does not feel heard. So what's the quick repair for relieving both narcissism and depression? Train yourself to hear both sides. That's it. If you tend to the me-centered side of the listening continuum, after you have voiced your viewpoint, concerns, or preference as to what you yourself think or want, what do you really need to train yourself to do next? Ask the other's thoughts about the issue. Listen to their reaction with your good ear, the ear that listens for what makes a lot of sense about what you hear. If you hear yourself saying, "but," or some variation of, "that's not so," then stop briefly. Listen again, this time for what you can agree with rather than what's wrong with what your partner is saying. Then, aim to find a way to be responsive to both your concerns and theirs. If you tend toward the other-centered side of the listening continuum, after your partner has voiced a viewpoint, issues, or preferences, what do you need to train yourself to do next? Ask yourself what your own ideas are about the issue. Listen to yourself with your good ear, the ear that listens for what makes sense to you about what you hear. If you hear yourself saying, "but," to yourself, then pause and listen again. Express aloud, tactfully and yet with confidence, what you have heard your inner voice saying. If your partner has difficulty hearing what you have said, say it again. "I'm sorry, perhaps I didn't make myself clear. Here's what I am wanting to clarify to you." Keep at it till you have enabled your partner to be successful in uptaking the information you are sharing. Then, aim to find a way to be responsive both to your issues and to your partner's. Practice a lot. The skill of bilateral listening can take substantial effort plus ongoing trial and error to develop. Chapter 7. Narcissism's Role in Our Political Polarization. He colludes. He cheats at golf. He conceals. The problem takes different forms, but the steps are the same. Opponents concentrate on ways to defeat and even embarrass the individual they view as belittling and embarrassing others. As one friend of mine confessed, they want to take him down. Today's citizenry lives under the spell of destructive narcissism, endemic in the age of Trump. We are so concentrated on the Trump character, and either the preservation or destruction of that personality, that we're losing our vision for the real issues needing attention and the real people behind the positions. Narcissism exists on a continuum, and a little is necessary for healthy self-advocacy. However, at the extreme, its unhealthy symptoms have a way of dispersing. Even though we wish to see narcissism as a solo act, it works more like a dance, preserving power through feedback loops. When we react to narcissistic displays, whether the pompous claim or the provocative obstacle, we do exactly that. React. We enact the very thing we oppose, keeping the focus on the egos involved instead of the complex problems needing attention. Those vicious cycles occur in intimate, family, and office relationships, as well as on the country stage. Collective narcissism pits groups against each other in similar ways, but is specifically empowered by feelings of vulnerability and conspiracy thinking. A threatened group reacts with righteous indignation and aggressiveness, triggering the exact same responses in its opposition, wedging greater and greater range between the groups until self-preservation ends up being the only objective. Even before the 2016 election, a study entitled Fear and Loathing Across Celebration Lines exposed that unconscious animosity to opposing parties was even more powerful and more automatic than implicit hostility based on black-white racial polarization, and that discrimination based on party association exceeded discrimination based upon race. Another study found that collective narcissism forecasted a boost in conspiracy thinking over the course of the 2016 presidential election. That trend applied to liberals and conservatives. Comprehending the relationships between unhealthy forms of narcissism and polarization can help us find a way out of the vicious cycle. But even with this understanding, we really need to appreciate what we're up against. Reality TV is popular because it takes advantage of primitive brain mechanisms that reward us through series of rage and revenge. We are addicted to our narcissistic bad guys. Understanding this helps. We can stop biting the hooks and instead allow the craving to peak and reduce over and over till narcissism loses its power. And we can intentionally look for new benefits, those that come through the harder conversations that generate broadened understanding. That doesn't mean exempting our representatives of responsibility for their actions. In fact, engagement needs such accounting. It does mean understanding when you are caught up in a cycle of shared dehumanization. The central function of destructive narcissism is self-absorption at the expense of empathy. Empathy is a vital prerequisite for significant and efficient policy conversations, a crucial for democracy. It's inadequate to feel in-group empathy. The challenge is to understand the ones with whom we disagree. Chapter 8. Is it narcissism or sociopathy? Narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, and antisocial personality disorder, APD, are two unique mental disorders and traditionally not generally diagnosed in tandem by clinicians. Though, it is clear to many psychological health experts today that APD can include narcissistic traits and that NPD can in some cases include antisocial or sociopathic traits. Such individuals may frequently be described diagnostically as suffering from antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic qualities, or narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial traits. And the event of this mix appears to be on the rise. For this reason, I've proposed the creation of a new hybrid diagnosis of antisocial narcissistic personality, in which, while the criteria for neither one may be entirely met, this confluence of symptoms and behaviors together make up a stealthily devastating, unsafe, and in some cases even fatal character disorder. I describe this macabre condition as psychopathic narcissism, see my prior posts, to indicate the nexus between pathological narcissism and sociopathy. However, what is the true nature and etiology of this treacherous crossway between NPD and APD? To begin with, we would do quite well to remember that narcissistic personality disorder, like any other mental disorder or particular psychopathology, must by definition be A. statistically deviant from the standard, and B. connected with medically substantial distress, impairment, or handicap, or with significant risk of negative effects to self and or others. Unlike other mental illnesses, including depression or anxiety, for example, character disorders like NPD or antisocial personality disorder are less defined by ego-dystonic subjective suffering than by suffering inflicted upon others in the form of cruelty, verbal abusiveness, manipulation, deceptiveness, and, in more extreme cases, physical violence. In my medical experience, the narcissist does automatically struggle with his youth injuries, and eventually, from the negative results on social relationships engendered by his narcissistic defenses. It's commonly only at that crucial point that the pathological narcissist is more than likely to look for treatment. Having said that, the fact is that narcissism is a prevalent, endemic aspect of contemporary life, and exists to varying degrees in each one of us. We all really need some step of healthy narcissism to get on in the world, which belongs to self-confidence, sense of importance, and so on. And most of us suffer to some level from some measure of pathological or neurotic narcissism also. For instance, a great deal of the destructive anger, rage, and violence, the displeasure between the sexes, and the hypersensitivity to any and all perceived political incorrectness besetting the shared American psyche springs from pathological narcissism. We live increasingly, as sociologist Christopher Lasch said 4 decades ago, in a culture of narcissism, one in which narcissism is idealized, worshipped, imitated, and rewarded, whether in the world of business, the entertainment industry, or the political arena. For the reason that this and other reasons, not the least of which is a growing narcissistic tendency in parenting, narcissism has unfortunately been significantly normalized in American culture in recent decades. Children of narcissistic parents or caretakers are prone to end up being narcissistic themselves, not necessarily as a result of acquired genetic predisposition, though this might play some part, but mainly because of narcissistic parenting style. Psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut, who customized and broadened Freud's original ideas on narcissism, suggests that pathological narcissism is an arrest or distortion of regular, pre-Oedipal development, throughout which the infant's natural, healthy, primitive or main narcissism is deficiently handled or unemphatically mirrored by the main caretakers, in most cases, the parents or caretakers, but particularly the mother. That so-called narcissistic wounding or disappointment lead to the unstable preservation of unsettled infantile narcissism into childhood, adolescence, and their adult years. Thus, narcissism in grown-ups might represent a type of healthy narcissism, either never ever enabled adequate expression or satisfaction during childhood, or overindulged and insufficiently moderated and mingled, and for this reason, never outgrown. It is in this sense that the pathologically narcissistic person's usually petulant behavior is akin to that of a ruined or declined little boy or girl who insists on having everything their own way, even if that means intimidating, lying, and cheating to get it. Or to the deep dread of being hurt, rejected, or deserted again. Indeed, the fatal self-absorption of the mythic boy Narcissus, from whom the medical term narcissism was obtained, is created to fend off potential rejection by means of the hostile or aggressive rejection of others. Such neurotic narcissism may manifest somewhat in a different way in women and men. It is near unrealistic to speak meaningfully about pathological narcissism without acknowledging and discussing its close connection with the conscious or unconscious striving for power. We all look for some sense of power and control in life, but the narcissistic character is consumed, possessed, and driven by this extreme need. As is so commonly seen in APD, people who suffer, or more appropriately make others suffer, from NPD try to assert power and power over others, though in somewhat more subtle ways. Nevertheless, this power drive can be quite compulsive and relentless, inspired by an unquenchable need to get rid of deep emotions of powerlessness, stemming usually from childhood. This pathological pursuit of power can be uttered in a broad spectrum of behaviors, from cruelly teasing or bullying a more youthful sibling, to inflicting physical suffering on pests or family pets, to the kidnapping, torture, sexual abuse, and in some cases horrific killing of innocent victims by psychopaths. When such individuals seek and effectively attain to positions of power in industry, academic community, or politics, the results can be disastrous, since it is especially in the pathologically narcissistic and power-hungry individual that absolute power corrupts absolutely. However, this exact same ruthlessness, sadism, cruelty, and unbridled will to power is played out in the lives of petty, crazed narcissists, creating chaos and triggering suffering to all those within their tinier sphere of influence. Probably, most individuals who try to lead others and to partake in the power and status of doing so, just like cult leaders, CEOs, and political leaders, are at least partly inspired, often unconsciously, by their immense need for so-called narcissistic supplies. For attention, for admiration, for love, for respect, for love. All of us really need some of this, but for the narcissist, this relentless need and the drive to please, it is never-ending, insatiable, and consistent. She or he can never get enough, and is, because of this, always seeking more compliments, publicity, adoration, power, and recognition. Indeed, when this deep need is chronically frustrated, as when it comes to most criminals of mass shootings, battles, terrorism, and other types of violent attacks on the public, it becomes what I refer to, see my previous posts, as a wicked rage for recognition. For such people, unable to find positive ways to get narcissistic supply, there's no limit to what they are willing to do to gain that sense of recognition and importance in the eyes of the world. Unable to successfully meet their aberrant needs constructively by being popular, they choose the facile yet nevertheless satisfying objective of infamy. Identifying widely known political leaders like Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin, see my prior post, celebs like O.J. Simpson, cult leaders like Jim Jones or David Koresh, or infamous lawbreakers like Charles Manson from some distance is a difficult and dubious business, even for professionals. Obviously, evaluating or profiling the personality of such a shadowy, enigmatic, and evasive figure as Osama bin Laden, now deceased, for instance, is an equally difficult task. Nonetheless, in a paper presented at the 25th Yearly Scientific Meeting of the International Society of Political Psychology in 2002, Dr. Aubrey Immelman, Associate Professor of Psychology at Minnesota's St. John's University, did just that. Plugging bin Laden's recognized biographical data into a character profile using the second edition of the Million Inventory of Diagnostic Criteria, MIDC, Immelman concluded that bin Laden's blend of ambitious and dauntless character patterns suggests the presence of Million's unprincipled narcissist syndrome. That composite character complex integrates the narcissist's arrogant sense of self-worth, exploitative indifference to the welfare of others, and grandiose expectancy of unique recognition with the antisocial character's self-aggrandizement, deficient social conscience, and disregard for the rights of others. Somewhere else, Immelman detected Osama bin Laden, as did psychiatrist Dr. Gerald Post, the popular CIA political profiler, a deadly narcissist, a term based on psychoanalyst Otto Kernberg's 1992 conception of deadly narcissism, the core elements of which are pathological narcissism, antisocial features, paranoid traits, and destructive hostility. At what point, then, does pathological narcissism become not only deadly, but sociopathic? By definition, sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder is a prevalent, pronounced pattern of neglect for and deliberate infraction of the rights of others, happening routinely since at the very least the age of 15, DSM-5. Furthermore, current diagnostic requirements includes failure to conform to social standards with respect to legal behaviors as suggested by repeatedly performing acts that are premises for arrest, deceitfulness, careless disregard for safety of self or others, and perhaps more tellingly, lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent to or justifying having hurt, maltreated, or stolen from another. A keen sense of conscience is missing. Moreover, as stated in the Diagnostic Handbook of the American Psychiatric Association, the sociopath or psychopath can be disarmingly lovely, excessively opinionated, self-assured, or arrogant. There is often a marked history of irritation, anger, contumacy, and verbal or physical aggressiveness. In children and adolescents, this problematic pattern of behavior can be clearly evidenced in conduct disorder, the presence of which is a requirement for diagnosing APD past the age of 18. Whenever we see some chronic pattern of illegal or destructive behaviors integrated with the lack of regret and appropriate effect, we're likely witnessing, at the very least, what we experts refer to as antisocial traits. Antisocial personality disorder, also described as sociopathy, psychopathy, or dissocial personality, normally involves, since youth, a persistent and pathological anger, rage, and resentment toward others. As I have suggested elsewhere, see prior post, antisocial personality disorder is, at its core, an anger disorder. Sociopathy centers around a deep-seated enmity towards family, culture, world, fate, God, reality, and, undoubtedly, toward life itself. However, the dissocial personality is highly competent at masking this underlying and mostly unconscious animosity and hatred. They are masterful actors, having actually sharpened and practiced their abilities since early youth. Like the narcissistic personality disorder, they have learned to conceal their deeply injured true selves behind what Winnicott called an incorrect self. What the world sees in such badly damaged and hazardous people is an incredibly rigid protective personality, to employ Jung's practical term, which stems from the dramatic masks used by stage actors in the age-old Greek theater. A carefully constructed and diligently preserved incorrect self, behind which popular, wounded, depressed true self hides. It has long been presumed that the antisocial character, the psychopath, subsequent to having committed a criminal activity, has no real sense of conscience or guilt, owing perhaps to some hereditary anomaly or insufficient superego. Nevertheless, I would suggest that the sociopathic conscience is, like the much deeper feelings belonging to their long-denied and dissociated true self, still present, but frozen deep beneath the thick, cold ice of the protective, incorrect self. That's why some offenders seem so undisturbed about their evil deeds and the dreadful negative repercussions. It is exactly what makes them such lovely, charming, and diabolically convincing scam artists, manipulators, and liars, and in many cases, cold-blooded killers. The primary difference between narcissistic and antisocial personality disorder is always one of degree. Pathological narcissism often includes antisocial proclivities. Sociopathy usually shows narcissistic propensities. The diagnostic boundary between these two contiguous personality disorders is fuzzy at best. It has been suggested and corroborated by research that those experiencing antisocial personality disorder, particularly what is called primary psychopathy, look for amazing levels of stimulus and seem not to learn from experience. It is just as if they are addicted to adrenaline, possibly to neutralize a hidden chronic depression or to feel anything at all, and so out of touch with their feelings that even typically unpleasant experiences, like prison time, seem not to discourage their bad conduct. Antisocial personality disorder represents pathological narcissism in its most extreme and harmful form. A sense of narcissistic privilege is characteristic of both narcissistic and antisocial personality disorder. When it comes to antisocial personality disorder, sly, manipulative, destructive, and aggressive conduct serves the subconscious purpose of triggering others to experience the exact same feelings of fear, rejection, victimization, hurt, terror, desertion, and betrayal, as did the perpetrator during her or his own childhood. The rapist, stalker, serial killer. Judging by their behavior, each of these criminals ostensibly shares a conscious belief that they have the outright right to thrust themselves, uninvited, into tribes' lives and to selfishly make use of others for their own narcissistic ends. However, in reality, this perception presumes a degree of mindful consciousness which for the most part is just not present. They do, however, share in common a unique absence of empathy with their fellow man, being unwilling or not able to feel empathy towards, nor identify with, the emotions and needs of others. Such grossly inhumane, even monstrous attitudes and actions stem mainly from a mix of compensatory grandiosity and a schizoid-like detachment from their own feelings. Certainly, a sense of narcissistic privilege is particular of both narcissistic and antisocial personality disorder, though maybe for somewhat different reasons. For the sociopath, like Charles Manson, the sense of entitlement originates from feeling that the world owes them for having been so rejecting, though the narcissist's sense of privilege stems generally from offsetting emotions of grandiosity, supremacy, and specialness. Some feeling of guilt and conscience is usually lacking, particularly in sociopathy, and both share in common a distinct lack of empathy with their fellow man, hesitating or not able to feel empathy to, nor identify with, the emotions and needs of others, past a reasonably superficial level of relating. The tremendous narcissism of criminals accused like Jodi Arias, Joran van der Sloot, O.J. Simpson, Drew Peterson, and so many others convinces them that they possess superior intelligence and, for that reason, can eventually outsmart the system. That narcissistic grandiosity regarding their intelligence, which in my experience is overstated and not necessarily commensurate with standardized intelligence screening, can be seen in Jodi's seemingly arrogant and hoity-toity pretrial pronouncement that no jury will ever convict me. In the same way that van der Sloot's reported compulsive gambling reflected a grandiose, narcissistic overconfidence that he could solitarily beat the casino system. Face-saving is one main aspect of pathological narcissism, the concerted, in some cases frantic or desperate effort to protect and secure one's public personality at all expenses. As C.G. Jung observed, all of us need a persona, but problems occur when we end up being over-identified with our personality, when it becomes too one-sided, imbalanced, and rigid. In pathological narcissism, this is specifically what has happened. The persona, which needs to do only with what we try to predict outwardly to the world, but, much more essentially, with how we wish to see ourselves, has become a shallow, incorrect self, one which conceals and compensates for what Jung called the shadow. See my prior post. We all have a shadow, a dark, unconscious side, including those negative, or sometimes even repressed positive, parts of our personality we turn down, disown, and deem socially or morally undesirable, remiss, wicked, or dangerous. Sexuality, aggression, inability emotions, vulnerability, love, healthy narcissism, and the desire for power, for example. In pathological narcissism, this grand persona compensates for repressed emotions of inferiority, vulnerability, weakness, smallness, neediness, and should be kept, maintained, and intensely resisted all challenges. Such compulsive face-saving commonly takes the form of exaggeration, obfuscation, manipulation, or cautious parsing of the truth, fibbing, fabrication, prevarication, or outright lying when the narcissist persona is somehow threatened from without or within. Sometimes such elaborate fabrication, lying, and self-deception can get nearly delusional, and, because of this, semi-psychotic percentages, with the individuals being absolutely convinced of the accuracy and reality of her or his self-serving falsification. See my prior post. In those people whose severe pathological or demented narcissism ultimately leads to participating in immoral, unethical, improper, or criminal behavior, the lying ends up being at the very least as much about keeping away from presuming responsibility and averting the legal or negative repercussions for their evil deeds, considering themselves smarter than or above the law. In demented narcissism, pathological narcissism crosses the line into antisocial behavior or sociopathy. Paranoia is another common core component of both narcissism and sociopathy, though it is not considered a requisite diagnostic criterion. However, the individual suffering from crazed narcissism feels, in some cases because of pervasive childhood trauma, taken advantage of by civilization and authority, and madly snaps against the world which she still believes to be out to get me. Though this underlying fear can be subtle, and isn't always delusional, and therefore technically psychotic, as when it comes to delusional disorder or paranoid schizophrenia, it can become a prevalent, integrated, stiff, and chronic part of the personality, sometimes of extreme tension, in some cases reaching psychotic proportions. A paranoid deception is, by definition, a psychotic sign. A fixed, incorrect, illogical conviction not comporting with objective consensual reality, but holds on to vehemently nevertheless. It's the supreme form of self-deception, and can in some cases be adopted by those very near and subservient to the paranoid individual in a sort of collective psychosis. From a diagnostic and evaluative perspective, the crucial question we must ask is always one of degree. Is somebody's narcissism pathological? And if so, to what extent? Does it drift over into the world of the sociopath, or possibly even the psychotic? Does his or her narcissistic vulnerability, hypersensitivity, and resulting reactive narcissistic rage tend to drive the individual to spontaneous, self-defeating, vindictive, petty, retaliated speech or acts, or to suffer and force others to suffer from a fundamental lack of empathy, an unwillingness or failure to recognize or relate to the emotions or reality of others? Is she or he excessively conceited, grandiose, self-indulgent, or interpersonally exploitative, taking advantage of others to accomplish her or his own self-centered desires? Does it potentially hinder her or his capacity for mature, measured, rational judgment and decision-making? Under tension or in reaction to justification, slight, insult, or psychological injury, will the individual stay a reasonable and rational adult, or will she or he be temporarily taken over or possessed by narcissistically injured, frustrated, petulant, illogical little boy or girl, snapping impulsively against the perceived criminal in a fit of primitive, cruel, raging retribution? This fundamentally human, yet in NPD highly exaggerated, talionic response poses perhaps the greatest threat. Narcissistic grandiosity, impulsivity, emotions of privilege, absence of empathy, inadequate conscience, combined with the susceptibility toward narcissistic rage in response to perceived insults or threats, and an unrelenting need for vengeance or retaliation, causing a paranoid worldview. Here is where pathological narcissism can and does insidiously lead to sociopathy. The crazed narcissist creates and keeps his or her own variation of reality, or Weltanschauung, seen and translated through the warped and distorted lens of pathological self-centeredness and self-deception. Certainly all of us take part in some degree of self-deception. Reality is made to comport with the narcissist's grandiose and inflated self-image, and those around him or her are forced to perceive reality in this same way. In many cases, this distortion of reality can end up being delusional, crossing over the line from neurosis to psychosis. Important to this discussion is the strong connection between the problems of narcissism, sociopathy, and evil. Perhaps most frightening to face is the fact that wicked deeds could potentially be committed by anybody, given the right or wrong set of scenarios. Remember, for instance, the timeless psychology experiments by both Milgram and Zimbardo, demonstrating this sobering fact, and the atrocities ignored and committed by normal German people at the time of the Holocaust, a phenomenon Hannah Arendt has dubbed the banality of evil. Each of us harbors the natural capability for evil, yet we choose for obvious reasons to deny that troubling reality, picking instead to unconsciously predict that potentiality for wicked behavior, the so-called shadow, onto others, the devil, political challengers or parties, movements, groups, foreign federal governments, terrorists, immigrants, minorities, religions, women or guys, instead of knowingly acknowledging it in ourselves. For some, a consciously chosen ethical, spiritual, or spiritual personality can serve to mask an unconscious and unsafe dark side, capable of expressing itself destructively in different forms, such as sexual indiscretions or political dirty tricks, which must be covered up and denied when discovered, or much even worse. Another striking similarity between narcissistic and sociopathic people is their amazing cunning and native intelligence. The ability to trick and control others toward one's own self-serving ends is one of the hallmarks of sociopathy, and an expression of the profound pathological narcissism underlying it. As founded guilty killer Joran van der Sloot's now public mental evaluation from jail suggests, the person suffering from and cruelly causing others to struggle with what I called demented narcissism, is basically an immature, selfish, self-centered, resentful, and raging kid inside a powerful adult body. See my previous post. They are upset with their parents or caretakers, angry with authority, mad with God, upset with life. They have been hurt, abused, emotionally wounded, denied, overindulged, spoiled, abandoned, or neglected in various ways, some grossly and some a lot more discreetly, and are still bitterly snapping against life and others, versus society, against authority. Like the Joker character played by Heath Journal in The Dark Knight, 2008, sociopaths plant seeds of turmoil and leave destruction in their wake. When you have a pissed-off 5 or 10-year-old with poor impulse control living in an adult body, with the liberty and power and resources to do just as she or he pleases, you have an extremely unsafe individual efficient in the most heinous, and, in the case of world leaders, catastrophic wicked deeds. Such angry, vindictive, embittered, opportunistic, impulsive, and in some cases predatory people see the world as their personal playground, and for some, everyone in it as their next potential victim or conquest. To quote founded guilty mass murderer Charles Manson, the poster boy for such evil or antisocial tendencies, "I'm still a little 5-year-old kid." See my previous post on the inner child. If violent transgressors like Jodi Arias or Joran Vandersloot are the spoiled brats, the self-indulgent, manipulative, narcissistic people many make them out to be, and the bloody killers they both eventually admitted to being, what might have made them so? When it pertains to Vandersloot, could his fortunate, protected, and liberal upbringing have been the main root of his psychological issues? Extremely negative, distressing youth experiences are typically part of the psychopathic narcissist's family history. The severe youth neglect, abandonment, and abuse of Charles Manson is one book example. Yet we must remember, as Sigmund Freud made clear, that throughout the most vital stages of personality development in childhood, profound damage or fixation can be done not only by getting too little love, attention, gratification of needs, but similarly by receiving way too much of these needed positive influences. Children naturally really need love, support, attention, and recognition. Having said that, they also really need firm limit setting, limits, appropriate and constant repercussions for bad conduct, discipline, and what growth-related psychologists call optimal frustration. Optimal aggravation is how kids learn to delay gratification, stand firm at tasks, develop inner strength and independence, and adapt to what Freud referred to as the reality principle. When such structure, limit setting, and discipline is lacking, the seeds of crazed narcissism find fertile ground in which to grow. So, to sum up, there can be a really fine, in some cases invisible line dividing narcissism and sociopathy, a line which can be crossed over at any time. The sociopath lives on the far side of this line, having actually bitterly turned against society, repeatedly and usually impulsively taking part in unlawful activity, resulting in several arrests, lying, manipulating, conning, deceiving, and aggressive vindictive behavior focused on undoing or paying back a hurt, and avoiding being pushed around by others, particularly by legitimate authority figures. The narcissist, on the other hand, is typically better adapted to the culture, works at a greater level, is usually financially and socially more successful, skirts the law more masterfully, usually staying away from a formal arrest record, chooses to work within the system, outwardly accepting instead of rejecting society, yet still plays by his or her own self-serving and rebellious guidelines, unceasingly seeks admiration and stimulation, and might be no less vindictive and consistent, albeit sometimes more subtle, in getting even for the smallest of perceived slights. The psychopathic narcissist lies someplace between these two poles on a spectrum of personality disorder, and in some ways, psychopathic narcissism might prove to be the most tough condition to recognize, since it is neither clearly one nor the other, but rather a complicated hybrid capable of committing evil discreetly and hiding it behind a sophisticated tissue of lies, interruptions, denial, prevarication, obfuscation, bullying, intimidation, manipulation, gaslighting, and disinformation. How can such remarkable phonies be identified? How can these wonderfully competent actors be unmasked? Even highly trained and experienced forensic psychologists and psychiatrists are at times taken in and fooled by these remarkable people, some of whom can even fool a polygraph assessment. In forensic psychology, we have numerous approaches and tests to find deceptiveness or malingering. Yet medically, most telling to the skilled forensic critic is discerning the presence of an enduring pattern, since childhood or adolescence, of deceptiveness, impulsivity, manipulation, irresponsibility, and self-centered neglect for, if not outright offense of, other people's rights, needs, and feelings without regret, often taking the form of unlawful conduct typically, but not always leading to arrests. These individuals experience psychopathic narcissism. Some manage to consistently outsmart the law, and they can be really effective, rising up to the peaks of power, celeb, and wealth. Yet, in most, though not all cases, even these smart bad guys ultimately mistake or get too arrogant, resulting in detection, prosecution, and possible incarceration.